Good morning. My name is Cindy Newlander, and I lead the plant records team for Denver Botanic Gardens in Denver, Colorado. Over the past few years, the Gardens has been involved with the Global Conservation Collaboration for Oak, led by the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, Illinois, in concert with Botanic Gardens Conservation International. Through this collaborative program, researchers and botanic gardens are working together to identify oaks that are threatened in the wild and ensure that they are represented in ex situ conservation collections, such as those found in many botanic gardens around the world. Since acorns cannot be stored in traditional seed banks like many other plant species, these conservation collections serve as safeguards for the species, even if they are growing outside of their native habitats. With support and funding from the U.S. Forest Service and the American Public Gardens Association through a tree gene conservation grant, I have had the opportunity to work on this species of oak, Quercus welshii, over the past 2 years, with the goal of collecting acorns and distributing them to botanic gardens for use in their living collections. For those of you who are not yet familiar with this species, Quercus welshii is more commonly known as Tucker oak, wavy leaf oak, or shinnery oak. The nomenclature of this species is still a bit murky, as it was previously considered a variety of Quercus havardii, or Harvard oak, which is found in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Recent molecular and morphological research by Sean Hoban at the Morton Arboretum suggests the disjunct western population is a distinct species. Quercus welshii is named in honor of Stanley Welsh, who was a professor at Brigham Young University and founded the herbarium there, as well as authored a Utah flora and who originally described the variety Tuckeri. Many of the populations in Utah and Arizona are on protected lands, such as Utah Bureau of Land Management, Arches and Canyonlands National Parks, and the Navajo Nation. This species is usually found growing in association with ephedra and blackbrush, as well as pines and junipers. The species is a sand dune stabilizer found on the Colorado Plateau. Most of the plants measure 2 to 6 feet in height above ground. I've read estimates that only 1/10 of the plant is visible above ground, so the stems and roots may grow 10 or more feet in depth in the sand dunes that form around them. They grow in clonal colonies that can be quite large. It is likely the oak growing in the dune behind Brook is only one to a few genetic clones across 30 or more feet of width. While there are other shrubby oaks found in the southwest, Quercus welshii and Quercus havardii are the two that are most likely to be seen growing in sand dunes. This image was taken near Mexican water at a site that is quite typical for this species. Locations of Quercus havardii and the disjunct population, Quercus welshii, shown in the red box, are shown on this map. The triangles designate locations where this species is found growing in situ, with black triangles denoting where known ex situ locations, ones that are now in botanical collections, originally hailed from. The empty small circles denotes county centroids with reported occurrences. 50-kilometer circles around each of these sites denote the expected native range. This graphic was created by the Morton Arboretum following collecting work in 2016. While the most current red list of oaks published in 2020 does not recognize Quercus welshii, Quercus havardii is categorized as endangered, with major threats including oil and gas drilling, agricultural ranching or grazing, and herbicides and pesticides as their main threats. But again, that is for Quercus havardii, which grows in the oil and gas drilling and ranching region of Oklahoma and Texas. I'll discuss the threats I see in the Utah region later. Over the past 2 years, I've visited the region 4 times. Once for pleasure in March 2022, once for scouting in May 2022, and twice for collecting in August of 2022 and August of 2023. The first collecting trip in 2022 only yielded 1 acorn, despite the scouting showing us many locations with acorns forming on the plants. An extremely dry and hot summer in 2022 caused many acorns to abort. Additionally, heavy rains prior to our arrival may have washed a few ripe acorns that did form downstream if they had not already become food for hungry animals. We did find empty caps at a few sites that led us to believe we had missed the opportunity to collect by mere days. This map shows the route taken for the most recent expedition for Quercus welshii in red. The goal of this trip in August 2023 was to collect acorns and herbarium vouchers from known locations, while also attempting to document additional populations noted on historical herbarium vouchers. The expedition totaled 1,500 miles over 5 days, and we visited 11 collecting sites. I am happy to report that we were able to collect over 1,000 acorns of Quercus welshii, the sites shown in bright pink, plus over 400 acorns of Quercus turbinella, the one in bright blue. Sites that were visited in 2022 but not in 2023 due to advanced scouting reports that there were no acorns forming are noted in lavender. Dark green acorns denote sites that did not have acorns in 2023. In addition to acorns, we collected vouchers that will be cataloged in the Catherine Kalmbach Herbarium at the Denver Botanic Gardens, also at the U.S. National Arboretum Herbarium in Washington, D.C., and for collections from the Navajo Nation in the Navajo Nation Herbarium in Flagstaff, Arizona. Like many oak species, there is a certain amount of plasticity to the appearance of individuals. You may notice that the leaves of the 3 specimens all have some variation from each other, with deeper incisions seen on the center one. The first site that we visited on our day near Mount Moab was at the Sand Flats Recreation Area. I had previously visited and collected vouchers at this site in 2022, but had not previously found any acorns. Due to the patchwork of land ownership in this area, we spent a lot of time walking the site that was split between Utah BLM, state trust land, and privately owned lands. These 3 images are all from plants found at the Sand Flats site. Note the variance in leaf shape, just at this one location. Also note that all 3 of these plants had acorns on them, which was a very welcome sight for just our second stop on the trip. In addition to variation in leaf shape, there is a wide range of heights seen in this species. For example, these are some tree-like specimens on Navajo Nation land in Monument Valley. As you can see from the photo on the lower left, the views found near this species are often breathtaking. At this site, northwest of Moab, we found the oaks growing out of cracks in the rock where sand had settled, so quite different from the dunes we witnessed in the other sites. These plants were quite diminutive and were only a couple of feet in height. This was one of the populations that we sought to redocument from a previous collection, one from 2014. We found our site about 150 meters south of the prior collection site, which was likely fairly accurately documented with GPS. This is the more typical form of Quercus welshii throughout the region, growing about 3 feet in height and collecting sand to form larger dunes over time. This particular site was in the Colorado River Valley near Dewey. The leaf shape on this particular specimen looked like this. Though there were no acorns found at this site, we harvested some cuttings to attempt to root. Unfortunately, we have not had success with asexual propagation of this species. Recent work in Texas has shown some promise in starting plants from root cuttings in various species of shrubby oaks from the Southwest. This was the other historic site that we were able to locate and redocument during this expedition. My biggest surprise during this collection trip was in finding a population that was not documented on SciNet in one of the most picturesque locations of the range. This stop at Horseshoe Bend near Page, Arizona, gave us not only a beautiful view of Horseshoe Bend, but we also found Quercus welshii spread across the canyon's rim, with hundreds of plants at this particular popular tourist stop. We documented by taking photos and adding them to iNaturalist. There were a few prior observations on iNaturalist, but no specimens are listed on SciNet in this location, perhaps due to permitting requirements for the Glen Canyon National Recreation Area and adjacent Navajo Nation, which manage this area. As I mentioned earlier, the threats faced by Quercus havardii in Texas and Oklahoma are not the same as what is faced by Quercus welshii on the Colorado Plateau. While human-caused issues are the main threat for Harvard's oak on the southern plains, the western region is more likely to be impacted by climate change and long-term drought, impacting fruiting, recruitment, and new seedling development. Although we had success in our collecting in 2023, approximately 95% of the acorns came from 2 maternal lines at the same collecting site. At most of the other sites we visited, the plants were either not producing acorns or only had small quantities on the plants. The 2 plants that were loaded with acorns were adjacent to a paved roadway, and I suspect that the runoff from the roadway likely aided the plant's reproductivity compared to other plants on the same site. Fortunately, across the visited populations, the overall health of the individuals seemed good, and in many of the populations, there were between 20 and 100 individuals, with some sites having numbers in the hundreds. Hybridization is also a potential threat to the species, with both Quercus gambellii and Quercus turbinella existing in the region. Some visited sites appeared to have hybrid plants among the populations. Here is a photo of my colleagues who joined me for the 2023 expedition at the site near Moab, where we collected the majority of the acorns on this trip. Jennifer Ackerfield is on the left. She is the curator of the Catherine Kalmbach Herbarium. On the right is Brooke Palmer, who is one of our propagators. She has been responsible for growing many of the acorns collected on this expedition. I'm excited to share some of the early results from this year's expedition. We collected acorns, vouchers, and/or observations from 9 sites for Quercus welshii. A total of 1,021 acorns were collected of Quercus welshii. Many of these acorns are now germinating in the garden's greenhouses, and many more were shared with 10 additional gardens or universities for research, propagation, and conservation work, including 2 international gardens in France and Australia. This work helps increase the number of locations where this germplasm is being safeguarded dramatically from virtually no collections about a decade ago to gardens across the country now being able to grow and one day display and interpret these plants to the public. One of the institutions that Quercus welshii and Quercus turbinella acorns were shared with was Oklahoma State University. Antonio Castillo's lab has been doing early growth and hybridization research on these 2 species. One interesting trend that they found from their research thus far is that larger acorns of Quercus welshii were more likely to germinate faster, whereas in Quercus turbinella, the inverse relationship was noted. I would like to thank the many individuals that I've had the opportunity to work with over the past 2 years, as well as the Utah Bureau of Land Management, Utah State Land Trust, Navajo Nation Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, who granted access and permissions to collect acorns and vouchers on their lands. I would also like to acknowledge the work of Sean Hoban and many of his colleagues at the Morton Arboretum, which led to the publication of the article cited here. Thank you for your time today. I can be reached at the email listed, newlandc@botanicgardens.org, and I'm happy to answer your questions at this time.